Absolutely, yes, sir. This is Theology in the Dirt, man. We're trying to practice our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world. You get sermon notes, links to the rest of the podcast at theologyindirt.com. My name is Mitchell Jolly.
And I'm Chris Hayes.
Yo, what's good, man? What's happening?
Man, being a dad's good.
Sweet.
Y'all got to meet and hear from my daughter, Addison, last episode.
Very awesome.
And she turns 9 today.
What?
As we record this on August 7th.
Happy birthday, Addison.
Happy birthday, sweetheart. It's hard to believe she's already 9, but
crazy.
Love that girl. And also what's good is the U.S. at this Olympics. They have far and away the most medals at 86 and counting. They lead with 24 gold, 31 silver, and 31 bronze.
Come on now. America.
China's really good, too. I think they've got around 60 or so. They have 22 gold, so just 2 gold behind us.
Okay.
And that's a big drop.
Well, we know they doping.
Of course. And using the child labor. Like, that kid's 11, don't lie. But U.S. is expected to add even more to their total as the week goes on.
Right.
What have you been watching some?
We have. Like, my wife refuses to allow me to watch anything else during the Olympics season at the house. So the evening we've been watching Olympics. Yeah, it's been just fun to watch.
So good. I wish it was more often, but it kind of keeps it specialty if you only do it every 4 years. So.
It does. I'm totally shocked at the lack of funding for certain programs. Like so many of these guys, they're not professional athletes. You know, they work at Home Depot. They have other jobs,
right.
And they train on the side. World-class athletes. That's mind-blowing. And they come out and they work hard. And some of them have to, even American. Like, which artist is actually funding one of the teams to be there? Shoot.
Yeah, they don't all have like sponsors. They can't all be like the men's basketball team, which they didn't want to stay in the cardboard beds and the
right.
Olympic Village. So they dropped, I think, $25 million on like their own private villa and chef for all their coaches, staff, and players.
Wow. Yeah, that must be nice.
Most other people can't do that.
Nope.
It's amazing to me the difference. Like most countries, not all of them, most countries will pay you if you win gold medals. Like U.S.
Right.
it's like 30-something thousand for a gold and 15, but like some countries it's like $600,000, $800,000 for a gold medal.
That's wild.
And you're talking about like athletes who probably don't make anywhere near, probably don't make even triple digits, because a lot of athletes, unless you're getting sponsors, or playing like one of the premier sports, you're not making a lot of money.
No, you're not.
Being a track star.
That's right. It's fun to watch, though, man. It's cool.
It is, yeah.
It's an absolute joy.
What's good with you?
Well, man, I saw this week, finally the feds admitted, this is good, this is super good, that they finally admitted to sending $239 million to the Taliban. And they said it was due to State Department not being able to vet recipients of humanitarian funds. And they said it was an accident. They sent $239 million to the Taliban. Now, what's interesting is for them to actually come out and admit that means that where there's smoke, there's fire, because now for a couple of months, it's been in public where Sean Ryan, Sarah Adams, CIA operative, who was at Benghazi, Eric Prince, former SEAL, but also founder of Blackwater, private security agency. The Blackwater guys were the ones hanging from the bridge in Iraq after they were killed. Eric Prince is an amazing human being. These guys who are in the know have been saying that the United States is printing and sending anywhere from $40 to $80 million a week to the Taliban in supposed humanitarian support, which is actually being funneled to Al-Qaeda and other agencies within Afghanistan. And so for the State Department to finally come out and admit that they accidentally sent $239 million to the Taliban is a big deal because they're recognizing that people know and they can't cover it up anymore. And here's, number one, that's a problem because, number one, as a taxpayer, that means we're funding terrorism.
Right.
The taxes I paid, and we paid far more than I would like to have paid every year.
Amen.
You just can't afford to be middle class. Like, we're not too poor to get anything back, and we're not rich enough for it to not count. So we're just all in that place.
Not really even a middle class anymore.
No, we just pay and we're out, and that's going to the Taliban, and that really bothers me. And personally, because the Taliban is holding as a hostage one of our friends, Ryan Corbett, freeryancorbett.com. His personal friend. We know Ryan. We've worked together with Ryan for many, many years. And because they're holding him as a hostage in a prison cell in Kabul along with 2 other Americans, there is no impetus on the part of the Taliban, the terrorist government of Afghanistan, to release our hostages when we're paying them. And so So what's good is at least it's in the public now, and at some point, maybe, just maybe, they're going to have to ask and answer the question, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And man, I'm going to stop short of saying anything declarative, but it's good that that's out, that they've at least admitted that, because that's the Biden-Harris administration. Like, all these things got out of control under their watch as President, Vice President of the United States of America. And so the facts are facts, man. And so what's good is that at least they're admitting it, and American citizens can make some decisions now. So that's what's good on my part, is like, at least now, by cracky, we know. And you know what time it is?
Shake and bake.
Come on, baby.
Shake and bake. Shake and then bake. Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
It's shake and bake time. Shake and bake, buddy. Shake it before you bake it.
Shake it before you bake it.
When he does the hand motions, that gets me every time. Like, shake it, and then you bake it.
Dude, I love it. That's incredible. And there's not a time I hear that I don't want to go watch the movie.
Right.
It's too good. Well, today, in the 135th episode of Theology in the Dirt, we're going to talk about the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. This is huge because it stirred, because people were asking questions, people were making comments, and conversations I was able to have with some folks that I actively engage with inside our church. Were asking questions, and I'm challenging them with some thinking. And so I think this is worth discussion, because it's theology in the dirt, man. It's like on display in the public square, an ideology. And so it bears a discussion. We can't assume anything here, because it's a little more complicated than what's on the surface. And so I think it's worth talking about. Let's give a little credit here to Mike Cosper and Jonathan Pageau. I think I'm probably totally butchering this guy's name on Twitter, because they did a really, really nice job of capturing succinctly a lot of what was being displayed on the Last Supper scene that really caused the uproar. By and large, the opening ceremony was pretty unique. The boats traveling down the river with all the country's athletes on them, and the various scenes along the way, it was actually kind of cool.
Right.
And so what happened is, though, toward the end, when you got to that scene that caused the uproar, it made people stand up, pay attention.
Right.
And so credit to those guys for being very succinct about what was happening in that depiction of Da Vinci's painting The Last Supper. Now, let's be very honest here. Da Vinci wasn't there. Da Vinci did not have a Polaroid of Jesus celebrating the Passover with his disciples. So this is an artist rendition that is iconic in Christian history. And so its depiction is just simply them taking what Da Vinci did and doing something different with it. And the difference with it is the problem. You can't dial this into simply like, well, Da Vinci didn't have it right, he wasn't there, so it's really not that big of a deal. That's a surface level. You're missing the point.
Right.
You're missing the point at that point. So credit to Cosper and these guys for making a complicated thing super succinct. So why should Christians care about this? Well, this is why. I'm going to monologue for a minute, and I'm going to shut up and let you. I don't have any points. I just need to spill this out of my soul a little bit. So why should we care? Well, this is why. The opening sequence name, according to Thomas Jolly, and his name is spelled correctly, so somewhere down the line, we go back. So don't claim him. He probably wouldn't claim me either. And I'm not sure we actually are, but every Jolly with the last name in the United States of America that's spelled, even the Jolley, it's a census misspelling out of South Carolina. I've done a lot of fun stuff with our family history. So Thomas Jolly, I will not claim him, but I'm not going to pronounce the French because I don't do French. I actually don't know any French language, and I would totally mess up the spelling or the pronunciation of the sentence. But it was a pun that read plainly, translating roughly, the Last Supper on the stage on the river Seine. All right, so that was the title.
Right.
So that's what it was called. So people were saying this wasn't the Last Supper or something else. No, Thomas Jolly, the creator, it was the Last Supper on the stage on the River Seine. The performance acknowledged this, and they acknowledged it at the time, even if they have backpedaled some. That's what it was titled. So denial of it is a backpedaling to avoid backlash. But later in the performance, the Last Supper scene it morphed as more performers joined the scene till eventually the naked guy painted in blue body paint appeared on a platter. Now, what's interesting is this character is the Greek god Dionysus. And this Greek god Dionysus began singing how much better the world would be if everybody was naked. All right. And there's a difference between naked and naked.
That's so true.
Naked is you don't have any clothes. Naked is you don't have any clothes and you have ill intent. My hunch is, at least in Silver Creek, understanding of naked and naked.
Makes me think of Ray Stevens' song. It's the call in the street.
Yes.
He's naked as a jaybird.
Yeah, naked as a jaybird. That's right. Naked, and he was naked. And the naked Dionysus, like this guy was interesting. Some of the lyrics to the song were, "Would there be wars if we had all stayed entirely naked? Where to hide a revolver when you're entirely naked? And no more wealthy, no more poor when we go back to all being naked." What's interesting, though, is there's a child present, right? You had a kid depicting there. She had a child there. What makes the child's involvement, though, even creepier is the fact that it's not a mere feast, but this is what is known in Dionysus culture as a bacchanal. The word bacchanal comes from one of the gods in the pantheon of Bacchus. Now, what's interesting, fun about Bacchus, too, Bacchus, if you read the Chronicles of Narnia, Bacchus makes an appearance in the Chronicles, not in the movies. And Lewis has some very interesting things to say about Bacchus, but the word bacchanal comes from Bacchus, another name for Dionysus. So Dionysus' other name is Bacchus. So you begin to see the connection of what's happening here with Dionysus and Bacchus. Dionysus, Bacchus is a Greek god for wine, fertility, festivities, and ritual madness, thus the bacchanal. He was later embraced by the Romans, who equated him to liber pater, or free father, and a god dedicated to unrestrained freedom. Okay, thus the naked song, right? Unrestrained freedom. Now, who cares, right? The French are weird. We know this. All kinds of, I'm try not to be offensive and offend French Americans or whatever, but the French can be weird. You got the headless Marie Antoinette and the dang thing. I'm like, oh, okay, we need to really? Come on, man. Christians shouldn't be so sensitive. Like, heard that one right there.
Yeah.
I've seen everything, but it just looks like they're making a statement about Jesus welcoming sinners. Nope. Negative, negative, negative. Wrong, 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 wrong. What we have going on here is the redefinition, the revaluation of what's valued. And it's dramatized in this scene. And it has real world implications in the Olympics as they played out. For example, this scene is intentionally shifting the dynamic. It's making a statement of what used to be is no longer, and it's redefined as something else. So how's this played out? Well, we see it played out in the boxing ring in the Olympics, where you got an XY chromosome. Now, I understand this is a unique situation. This person is an anomaly. I recognize that. Born with female parts, but the XY chromosome and the production of testosterone, which led to their physical stature being bigger and more strength and more powerful. There's two of these people in the Olympics. And this man beat up this woman to the point the woman ended the fight. It's like, I can't do this. I think her actually nose was broken in the deal, so she quits the fight. And so what we end up having here is a biological male hurting a female boxer and is rewarded for it by advancing to the next round, which is a complete reversal of how we understand human relationships to have to work. So in the name of redefinition applied to sports, we're rewarding violence by men against women and setting a standard that will almost surely, in many categories, take biological women out of the games at some point. We can comment on this later, but you ever notice that no body who transitions sexes, going from women to men, want to be involved in sports with other men? Like there's
Right.
no woman transitioning to a man who wants to strap on some pads and go try to make try to get a D1 scholarship to play football.
Right.
Right? But they're going the opposite direction. Leah Thomas, which is not Leah, it's a dude, wants to swim against women and be number one because he's swimming against women. But if he's swimming against men, he's like 276. Right? And so this is a problem. So what's ended up happening here is this reversal is working itself out in the Olympic Games. So it's not just about blasphemy and respecting sacred symbols. It's about culture, it's about civilization, and it's about norms that safeguard women and children.
Yeah.
So you got a child being exposed to this garbage. You got women getting beat up because of this redefinition by men. And so therefore, it's about culture, civilization, and norms. I'm not surprised, though, that we're seeing a more, and this instance, though, this is not full aggression. This is passive aggression.
Yeah.
And so what we have here, I'm not surprised we're seeing a more passive-aggressive persecution of Christians like this, because this is how taking what has been norm in Western civilization as a dominant piece of Western culture, a Judeo-Christian ethic, you begin to set it aside historically by being passive-aggressive with it, by co-opting it in some manner. And so Revelation 12 and 13 have application to this, right? So you have the dragon fighting the people of God in Revelation 12, giving his authority to his henchmen who live out a false gospel, mimicking the wounding of one and its resurrection to life, and given the power of the dragon to speak words. And Revelation 13:10 says, then this calls for the endurance and faith of the saints to endure and not be deceived. And so you got a dragon deceiving those who are of the faith, being persecuted by the dragon, needing to endure and persevere. And so the call of those two chapters in Revelation is for the people of the Lord Jesus to be aware and not be deceived, and expect that the norms of the faith are going to be attacked. And it's not, and it's what Jesus said would happen. Mm-hmm. So what was being communicated was crystal clear to me. And I also understand that it's not crystal clear to others for all kinds of reasons, because the enemy's not going to be clear about his overt subversion, right? That's not what he does. In fact, Jesus said it like this in Matthew 24:24, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And so if there are false Christs and imposters who are going to perform signs and wonders that lead people astray, and if even possible, the elect, then how much more people who are already deceived by the enemy are going to be doing things that are deceptive in nature. So this is why it might not be so easy to recognize what's happening.
Right.
You just take it for surface value. Well, the French are weird, and Jesus is welcoming sinners to himself. It's so much more complicated than that, because the enemy is doing something subversive. And so we have to be learned enough, smart enough, wise enough, and discerning enough to pick this stuff out, so that we have to endure and persevere and maintain the faith.
Right.
My concerns for our people and the people of God revolve around the complicated nature of unraveling this and living faithfully, not with our head in the sand, but fully aware with prophetic voices that won't be ashamed before the Lord on the last day, because we didn't call it for what it was. John wrote to the people in Revelation that had to endure a multitude of issues. They had to endure persecutions. Most of us have not had to endure in our lifetime any type of mocking of our faith or persecution associated with that. So this is strange for us. Mm-hmm. This is why it's easy for us to misinterpret it. Is because it's weird for us. It's kind of like, it can't be that, so it has to be this. And so we don't know religious persecution. We don't know what this little artistic episode did in pulling back the comfort of Western civilization and our comfortable existence. We don't understand that what has begun to happen now is that is being questioned and is being taken away through mocking initially. It revealed the contempt that is held toward those who believe in Jesus. And I think it started down a road of a more overt pressure against the faith that may, I say may, because I don't know, may increase over time. Christians in other parts of the world are used to this. This is strange for us. This is different. Christians in other parts of the world are very much used to being the minority and having their faith demeaned. We're used to our faith and the church having a seat at the table. And to have that question causes us, again, going back, to misinterpret what we're seeing. So it can't be that. It has to be something else. And so the increase of light persecution of the faith is sort of like the spread of Nazism over Europe. No one wanted to admit what was happening or that it was a problem until they got arrested for helping Jews. Mm-hmm. See Corrie ten Boom, which we'll be doing for All Saints Day this year. Yes, this is a problem. Yes, the Nazis are dangerous people. Willem is telling us this ideology because he studied in Germany. We're aware this is a problem. Oh, and the guy down the street, they disappeared. Where are they? Oh, people are showing up to my house asking if they can stay here because they're being hunted. No, this can't be that. This can't be that. And until you realize it is that. But that ideology started simply in some ideas and thoughts and a book on the part of Adolf Hitler. And it began to marinate till it became an actual practicality, and people started disappearing into labor camps and concentration and extermination camps. And so likewise, things start simple. Things start easy, demeaning, mocking, making fun of. Then the next thing you know, they make you wear a Star of David on your clothing. The next thing you know, they're taking you out of your house and relocating you somewhere else. So it starts with equating the Last Supper to a bacchanal and redefining the characters at the table. And the next thing you know, it begins to progress. And so what we have to do is be aware enough to see it for what it is and not be deceived and not be taken aback if and when it happens to advance. It's hard to admit that our seat at the table of Western civilization might be in jeopardy. So we can't imagine that it meant what they meant by that stunt, inspired by the dark forces of evil in the heavenly places and played out by people taken captive to do the enemy's will. We can't imagine it would be that, but it is that. It is what it is. And if we don't call it for what it is, we're going to be deceived. And so I don't want people to be deceived. Don't assume the best on the part of people who hate our faith system because they don't have the best in mind. As Paul told Timothy, these people have been taken captive by Satan to do his will. And it starts simple. And it can and will progress. And to some degree, I don't know what we can do about it other than be aware.
Right.
John wrote Revelation to those 7 churches to show them who Jesus is and what he demanded of them to persevere in the midst of this difficulty. Because on the backside, those evil people will be judged. The enemy, the dragon who's influencing them, will be cast in the lake of fire along with all his followers, and there will be the new heaven and the new earth, and you will reign with Christ forever. So there's this encouragement. In the middle of all this, this calls for endurance, calls for you to know, don't be deceived and persevere to the end. And so for us, we need to take Revelation 12 and 13 seriously. We are being pursued by the dragon. We are at war in the heavenly places, and that manifests with people who've been taken captive by the dragon to do his will, and we need to see it for what it is and don't be deceived. And so I will stop. That's my monologue. Chris, what you got?
Over here, man. Bring it on.
All right.
You know, I mean, you hit on a lot of what I had to say. It's clearly it's a microcosm of a much bigger cultural trend of trying to normalize sexuality, but not sexuality as it's intended to be,
right?
But just the expression of free sexuality,
right?
Be who you are. LGBTQ plus agendas. Drag queens. Again, you had the child, but you also had the drag queen right next to the child.
Right.
Then you had Papa Smurf on the table, doing his thing. And it's funny to me you mentioned that song because you're right, like the lyrics of that song. One of the other big performances was of John Lennon's Imagine, right? Very similar theme here, right? Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine there's no countries, which Olympics would be not even around if that was the case. So I thought that was ironic.
Right.
Nothing to kill or die for, no religion to, and I think I mentioned this the other day, a song that's, held in high regard, but if you really read the lyrics, it's really not that great of a song. It sounds good, but it's all this theme of, and then, of that. And then you've got Christians the outrage of Christians on social media. And then you have the bashing of those Christians for being outraged over that, but not being outraged over other things.
Right.
And a lot of that's because of the political tie-ins with Christianity and a certain
Right.
political party.
Right.
Whether that's, and some of that is true because we've done that as
Right.
as a church. The church, especially in our country,
Yeah.
have made that mistake of aligning with a political party, and now the rest of us are reaping,
Right.
what that has sowed.
Right.
So I mean, but again, this whole cultural trend, it's not new, and the French in particular, they have a long history of making fun of Christianity, and I think the hard part about all this too is it's you have the people bashing those who are outraged about it by saying things like, "Oh, it's just art, right? It's just
Right.
creativity. It's just beautiful. It's inclusive." And I think one of the hardest things for us right now is not just the fact that as Christians we're being persecuted in a very unique way, particularly online and the social public forum in social media channels in particular. And on the news and internet and all those places.
Right.
But the interesting fact to me is that those attacks are often use our Bible, our Jesus against us. Well, if y'all need to act more like Jesus, because Jesus would be right there in the middle of that pride parade, because he loves everybody, and so. Which leads to more outrage, but it makes it difficult because, yes, he is loving, but if you actually read the Bible, he's got a pretty strong no tolerance policy on sin.
No tolerance policy. That's awesome.
In fact, it was kind of a requirement for him healing people and his miracles. It's like, okay, now go and sin no more. It wasn't like, okay, you can go back to being, a harlot. Yeah. Yeah, go back to your life after meeting with me. No, it's very clear. Like, you've experienced me. You are changed. Now go and live that life. And so
at one point, he actually said, "Stop sinning so that nothing worse may happen to you."
Right.
Those are convenient pieces to leave out of Jesus' mouth, right?
Yeah, because and again, churches are becoming more and more guilty of this too. It's so much easier to talk about his love, but we have to understand that there's his characteristics of who you are include wrath and righteous anger, and we could do a whole podcast on what the Bible says about sexual immorality. It's very, very clear on that, and it's like it feels like every other sin we're supposed to attack. That one in particular, Paul tells us to flee.
Yeah, because there are supernatural implications to sexual immorality. If you go back to Genesis 6, sexuality, apart from God's standard, is all fueled by spiritual forces.
Yeah.
Which is why in cult religions, they're cult prostitutes. There's cult sexual encounters, is because sexuality is rooted in spiritual darkness, and sexual fidelity is rooted in holiness. It's a spiritual struggle, which is why pornography is more than just the physical rejection. It is also a supernatural reality that works in the brain structure and nervous system of a human being. It's spiritual in its nature, 100%. I don't know that's a side. When you said that, it's like
it is, but it's certainly right in the middle of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So kind of those things I'm saying leads me to my first question for you today.
Yeah.
With all that said, do you feel it's a both problem? And what I mean by both problem is it's more than just the culture, meaning that Christians at large have also brought some of these things on ourselves by not acting more like Jesus in public forums? Or is it strictly a problem of this is what the culture is going? And does that make sense? I don't know if I worded that sense.
Well. Yeah, I think it's a both. I think we have a responsibility. Like we can't, we should complain, but when spiritually we have been so withdrawn from the public square because of an eschatology that said all this is going to be burned up and it's no good. We need to make sure as many people as we can get saved going to go to heaven because this is all going away and we're going to go out there somewhere. And so therefore, let it all go. Withdraw. And when we withdrew, what we did is we gave the domains of society to pagans, And so when pagans act like pagans, we're now all shocked and surprised. And so some of it is as a result of there aren't Christians in the public square who produce good things enough that it's actually public consumption. So what we did as a result of our eschatology, we produced Christian movies. We produced Christian alternatives, Christian entertainment, as opposed to just Christians affecting all entertainment and it all just being good and healthy and whole, consumable by everybody. And so we had our Christian versions. And so where were Christians at? They were at the Christian things, completely withdrawn from people who didn't know. And so what we've done is we've created, by not being present, we've created two cultures, as opposed to advance the culture of the kingdom of God, which should take over all forms of art and entertainment. Like, that's the kingdom coming. That eschatology that says this is all going to burn up is based on a couple of verses. You got to ask the question, what did Peter mean by that in light of this multitude of other passages that talk about the new creation?
Yeah.
Like, Peter has a clear intent, and it's not that this is all going to burn up. He's making a statement about the cleansing nature of the holiness of God in restoring and recreating new creation. Isaiah, Revelation, Colossians, it all makes super, super clear that what God is doing is restoring Eden. He made Eden good, and it is not innately evil. The creation is innately good, it's not evil. Sin has cursed it and set it upside down. What Jesus does in the establishment of his kingdom is set things right back up to its right side up. And so we've pulled out because of an eschatology, and rather than engaging, we've disengaged, we've let them have it. We've let pagans have it. So again, rather than Christians doing the healing work of making all society better and good, we've now just created alternatives, which are inferior. Mm-hmm. And so part of it is a function of us not being present. Da Vinci, they were mocking a piece of artwork that depicted a biblical scene because Da Vinci was in the public square and created a great piece of art.
Right.
And so rather than us being there to combat that kind of garbage, we've been absent. And so it's some of us being absent. But at the same time, it's a manifestation of the fact that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. There's a real cosmic struggle going on that first was displayed in the garden, then it was displayed in these spiritual forces coming to pillage humanity by breeding with women and creating the Nephilim. And then they're seeking their own fame at Babel. So you get 3 rebellions in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And so therefore Paul will say we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and rulers of wickedness in the heavenly places. And so what you have is a real cosmic struggle. And so some of it is we should expect this, but we should be in the public square fighting it.
Right.
And which requires actual, tangible, hands-on, systemic change. And that's hard work. Bible study's easier. Let's go do another Bible study, man. Let's go do something just for us Christians so we don't get stained by the world, as opposed to, no, man, we need to be present. And we preaching the good news, having a Christian worldview and applying it to healing what's broken. And so I think it's a both solution.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason we say 3 Rivers You Are Sent at the end of service. Now, fellowship and small groups and life together is absolutely important. So it's a both situation.
Yeah.
But when we've done is created a separate category for everything.
Yeah, that's right.
And what we've done is we've now distanced ourselves from the public square. So if we're not in the public square, then really can we blame them for doing what they have done, right? It's almost, and I know this isn't the intention of this parable, but it just popped in my mind, the parable of the talents. Like, it feels like what we've done is we've taken what the Lord has given us and we've hid it over here. Yeah. We haven't invested it with the bankers and multiplied it like he wanted us to do. And again, I know it's not an apples to apples comparison.
Pretty good application.
But, right.
That's pretty good.
But I mean, I feel like that's what we've done. You're right. It's like, let's just make let's make this Christian category. And it's not wrong to make Christian worship music. It's not wrong to have like Christian apparel lines and things like that. But with the intention of it is to wrap a fence around us rather than engaging with the square and being part of that. Yeah. I think that's been a big part of the problem.
Well, what's interesting is in that parable too, the Lord, as he's telling this story, speaks to the one who went and hid their talent, said, so you thought your master hard? You thought your master to be a not good, just master? Then if that's really what you believed, you should have at least invested in it with the bank and brought me some interest at the end. In other words, part of that parable is not just you hid, you didn't do well as a steward with what you were given. It's you didn't know your master. Yeah. You thought this when in fact this is untrue, and you've witnessed it with the one with 10 and the 5. So you didn't really know me at all. And so sort of Jesus' point is those who are not engaging and doing the work of the master really don't know the master at all. They assume he wants them isolated when in fact he said, no, I want you to go to all nations and make disciples. Mm-hmm. Don't isolate yourself. Who told you to do that? I didn't tell you to do that. You didn't read Genesis 1:26-28 clearly at all. You're trying to disprove Darwin as opposed to get on mission. And it's like, no, let's get after it. And so I would argue one of Jesus' greatest intents in that parable is that the fact that the one who hid their talent didn't know the master real well. Mm. And if they knew the master, they would have been much more willing to risk getting in the public square and doing something with their talent. The 10 and the 5 did. They understood their master, knew their master, so therefore they went and took a risk. Yeah. A much greater risk than investing it with the banker. Mm. They could have lost the 5 who made 10 could have lost all 5. And the master didn't rebuke him. Well done, good and faithful servant. So it's sort of like, no, get in the public square and try. We may fail, but the reward is not contingent upon our failing. It's contingent on obedience, Yeah. And so, yeah, man,
that gets me just fired up. There's a lot of disciples moments where they didn't know the master very well.
Right.
They're in the sea, in the weather, in the storm, or Peter on the water. I'm like, man, know your master. Yeah. But was it the centurion that came and said, just like, you don't need to come. He's healed. Yeah. Like he knew the master.
He knew the master through his vocation.
Yeah.
I'm a man with authority, and I have people under my authority. I say to this one, go, and he does it. This one, do this, and they do it. I recognize you're in authority because if you say it, it happens. And Jesus said, I've not seen such great faith even in Israel. So here's a Roman centurion who understood authority, saw general revelation enough to know that's the one who made that law. So all he's got to do is say it. That blows my mind. Yeah. And so here's an unbeliever who saw more than the people Jesus actually initially came to. And so it's, there's a component of seeing that and getting after it, man. It's like, that was great faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, let's continue on. You mentioned the boxing issue. Amani Khalif, I probably didn't say that right, but first he or she, I don't know what to use now, but it was called a male boxer, and it came out later, so I'm glad there's been some corrections. Mm-hmm. It's not, you're right, it is a very unique situation. He was born with XY chromosomes, which are male chromosomes. Now, interestingly enough, the IBA, which is the International Boxing Association, actually disqualified Khalif in 2023 for elevated testosterone levels, and again later because of an unspecified test. However, the IBA has no ruling power over the Olympic Committee, so that's why Khalif was allowed. And then the other one, they fought each other. Khalif won and advanced to either the semifinals or the finals yesterday. But either way, it raises ongoing issue of males and partial males competing in women's sports, and I'm going to continue to stand strongly against that because there's still an advantage there. Yeah. And it's kind of one of those situations where you can say, well, that's not fair then if this person's not even like fully male. It's not a trans competitor. And I'm like, well, as sensitively as I can say it, life's not fair, and at some point we've got to draw lines. Everything can't be open and welcoming all the time to everyone.
Right.
But all this continues to be a part of the deconstruction of gender and an ongoing attempt to kind of muddy the definition of what male and female are, which is a complete turn away from one of the most important components of human life and creation.
Yeah.
It's not getting any better. We have female leaders and politicians who can't even define what a woman is and just outright refuse to answer the question. But then all of a sudden, when it comes to abortion, we care about women's rights and women's health. So now we've muddied two things. We've said, well, we can't no longer define a female by her parts or her chromosomes. However, we care about women's rights, and abortion is now a health issue.
Right.
And so we got that aspect, and then we've absolutely shattered biblical manhood and rebranded it as toxic masculinity. But those feminists fighting that battle don't have a problem with those men if they decide to become women and beat other women in sports.
Right.
And so it's just like, this is the stuff that frustrates me the most. So,
well, this is why you had to you had to take Da Vinci's painting and turn it upside down, because what that painting represented was the worldview that said these are norms according to God's standard. So if you can begin to demean that and turn that upside down, you can have the XY chromosome boxer beat up the XX chromosome boxer.
Yeah.
Not a deal. Because we in our art have turned that worldview on its head, and we no longer subscribe to that anymore. That's kind of where I was going in my little monologue, was like, this is really much more complex, and we want to give it credit for it, because the enemy is not dumb. The enemy's super intelligent watcher. These were intelligent beings created by God who rebelled against the Lord Jesus and assisted in creating a culture that was so corrupt that the Lord called Noah to rescue a few, to repopulate the earth, to destroy the rest of it. And dude, the truth of the matter is, pre-Diluvian civilization was clearly much advanced due to some of this stuff. And so we shouldn't be surprised that some of these entities continue to influence the worldview that says what norm is.
Right.
And as they do that and they turn it upside down, we shouldn't be surprised then that when culture begins to reflect the upside down art. That's the importance of art. Like what you could do some art history here. Stay on your point. I'm so on a rabbit trail, but art is intended to be a depiction of life. That's what God gave creative talents for, is depictions of real life. What happens in the dark kingdom is art begins to turn on its head, and rather than imitate real life, it begins to be a mechanism by which it shifts life to its worldview. And so what ends up happening when that happens is life begins to imitate art rather than art being an imitation of life. And so in pop culture, what ends up happening is society and culture begins to imitate art. So if the dominant form of that art, whether it's television, paintings, or whatever, is upside down, life starts being upside down, because we want to be like that person. We want our relationships to look like that, as opposed to the art depicting beauty as normative and defined by God. And so that's why you have to go after the arts. You turn the arts upside down, life begins to imitate art. That's how the enemy works. And when technology advances that, it's just viral.
Yeah.
It's just viral. So that's a little bit of worldview on art, but I had to.
Yeah. Well, and it feels like we're heading down to some Tower of Babel, Sodom and Gomorrah type ending if it continues. So I got one more question to come back to you, but kind of before we get to that, I kind of want to hit back, because what's fascinating, not in a good way to me, is especially when we talk about the abortion issue. I was listening the other day, somebody was talking about how, because Satan doesn't have the power to kill God, one of his primary ways of doing what he does is through abortions, through the killing of babies, because he knows that babies and young kids and children are, the death of babies really pulls at the heart of God, right? Yeah. And whether that's biblical or just a takeaway, I think it's spot on. I think it's truly, and what I find interesting is the same way that Satan used the Lord's power and the work of that, twisted it in a way where to get Eve to sin, is the same exact thing that's happening in our culture when it comes to abortion. We've twisted it from choosing to kill and murder innocent babies. We made it to about choice. Now I rarely ever hear anything about choice. It's not like I don't even hear that word as much. We've now taken that. It was about a choice. Now it's all about health and rights and health. Yeah, health care for women. Even though women have the same rights as men do in this country, the only thing they can't do is pee standing up, and some of them probably can, and that's probably not a good idea. I digress. But if we don't fight for the narrative of truth, and we don't fight for the biblical worldview that we need to have, then that manipulation is going to continue to change and be successful. It's about to happen because one of these candidates that's running for president is as firm a believer in this as anyone we've ever seen. And if she gets elected, I'm just concerned. Like, I'm just really concerned about it, and that it's going to continue. That we're going to take steps backwards, and maybe even start running in the other direction. I don't know if that's true. I trust the Lord is in control of that.
Yeah.
But we at least have to be aware of that. So, all that to say,
Yeah.
before I get to Hayes takeaways, one more question that I want to ask you, and you may not even have a firm answer here, but Mitch, like, what do we do with this as Christians? Because it feels like a winless fight. And I know this is one of those hills worth dying on because God's image, his creation, and his kingdom are at stake. Yeah. But it's weighty, and we're now in a world where if I say I don't believe in gay marriage, well, I am homophobic. And if I don't support trans people, I'm transphobic. And we're labeled these things, which I don't. That doesn't bother me. I can call me whatever you want to. I know you're wrong, but this is the defense mechanism, and we're in a place where everything's inclusive. So, like, what do we do with that? How do we fight that battle?
Yeah. Well, this is where we have to have a worldview and go all the way back to the bedrock foundation of why we believe what we believe. This is why that scene was so important, because if you can redefine the source of truth, because that the Lord said in his dialogue with Pilate, said, I came to bear witness to the truth.
Yeah.
Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus' claim is that he is the God of the Old Testament, that he is the second person of the Trinity, he is creator, and he is therefore the standard of what is true, what is right, what is wrong. And his standard is X, Y, and Z. That if you're going to be against X, Y, and Z, you have to flip him on his head. And then create a bacchanal. You have to create a anything goes. You have to create libertine and anarchy and completely unhinged liberty, so that you then don't have to live up to the norm of sexual relationship between a husband and a wife and children being the product of that. What you have to do now is turn that on its head and say, no, this is an issue of me being able to express myself sexually with zero consequences. Because the consequences are built in by God, natural law. So we have to ignore that and ignore natural law and execute the child that we created to be an image bearer of God. So you flip all. So when you go back to your basic worldview, who is God? Who is man? What is humanity? What are their intended purposes? What is creation? And you answer that through the lens of Jesus. All these things get cut off. You can't do them. They don't work. But if you don't want to agree with that and you're part of the rebellion, you have to flip that upside down and create an alternative worldview. And that's exactly what you have there, is you have a created alternative worldview. And so what we have to do as Christians is go back to the text and let the text speak to us and give us clear instruction on what is true and what is untrue. And then once we have that, we have to then be in the public square enough to not be ashamed of that. And it's not just being ashamed of the gospel, because another thing, we've truncated the gospel and made it only about salvation. The Bible makes clear that the gospel is the salvation work of Jesus, but it's also the whole world view of Jesus. It's everything from Genesis to Revelation. And it's an incorporation of the questions: who is God? Who is man? What is creation? What are we here for? And when we have that worldview intact and we're in the public square, we then have the capacity to shape culture. We have the capacity to create systems that create frameworks, that create scaffolding for humanity to flourish on. And so we have to take that seriously. And that has implications. Number one, we have to, not one, read our Bibles enough. We were talking about this morning with some guys that I walk in discipleship relationships with, and they're seeing the contrast between folks that they know who don't read their Bibles. They go to church, but they never read their Bible. They never study the Scripture, versus them wrestling with complicated things that we're reading in our Bible because we're umpteen times through it again and going, what about this? What about this? What about this? And yeah, that's right. What about those things? Yeah. And as we're doing that, we're having to wrestle with breaking down broken, destructive systems that are killing people and creating systems that provide flourishing. And so once we have that worldview in place, it's imperative we get in the public square and create systems that create frameworks that provide scaffolding for human flourishing. But the problem with that is that's complicated. And Christians just don't want to think that deeply. We just want it to be about sharing salvation and somebody praying and not going to hell. That is part of it. Don't want anybody to misunderstand me. If anybody comes to our church, you're going to know we preach the gospel with the goal of seeing people come to faith in Jesus. And at the same time, Jesus told us to heal what's broken. And that's complicated. It's not simple. Systems change is hard. And so as Christians, we have to, when we have this worldview in place, it forces us to the public square to create systems. And that means our vocations matter. You can't just quit your job to go into ministry. There is a place for ministry, but it's the exception, not the rule.
Right.
Like I left the classroom for full-time stuff because there was a need for it and a desire for it. But at the same time, that should not be norm. That's abnormal. The truth of the matter is, stay in the classroom, stay in the engineering office, stay at the city council office, stay in the doctor's office, because there you're going to, with that worldview intact, create systems that provide framework, that create scaffolding for human flourishing. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have to do as Christians. And that is the advancement of the kingdom of God. And that is what leads up to the second coming of Christ and the final realization of the kingdom of God here on earth as in heaven. That's our task. Yeah. So that's a lot. I recognize I just said a lot.
No, but you're right, though. And even as we're talking, like we talked about gender deconstruction, but what's really happening in the culture is a deconstruction of all of Genesis. I mean, they're deconstructed gender. Yes. We've deconstructed marriage. Yeah. We've deconstructed the purpose of sex and marriage, and marriage highlighting the relationship between Jesus and the bride. I saw the other day, like, man, you guys really care a lot about there was something talking about J.D. Vance about something about being married, but you're the person that you worship was never married. It's like we're using, or Paul, like we're using the fact that Jesus and Paul weren't married to downplay marriage and having kids, like raising a family. Right. And so, I mean, it's real and it's hard. Yeah. But that's what ministry is, and that's what believing the gospel is. And I wonder if it's not going to end up being this is going to sound really weird, but maybe it's a good thing that we're going through this so that Christians read their Bibles more, are able to defend it more, and rise up against it because it creates this greater sense of urgency.
Yeah, 100%. It is that there is no such thing, no difficulty is pleasant, but all difficulty shapes the character of the humans who go through it. In fact, there's no other way. It's natural law. You can't grow muscles without tearing muscles. And the way you tear muscles is to lift heavy things. And so that's built into the human body. You get more resilient by going through difficulty. For the church to have to go through difficulty is going to cause us to be more resilient. It's going to force us back to the Bible. It's going to force us to the essentials. It's going to force us to fellowship. It's going to force us to interdependency. It's going to force us to share the gospel. It's going to force us to create systems. It's going to make us think. Even in Christian history, you see this over and over and over again. In fact, Ralph Winter identified 10 epochs of Christian history in his article. I think it's written in 1980 called "The Kingdom Strikes Back," in which difficulty that caused the church to be purged and forced it underground led to its flourishing that captivated nations. Mm-hmm. But you didn't captivate a nation unless you were forced underground into difficulty. And so this is good for us. Yeah. This is important for us. And what we will learn in this is we will learn ultimates. Because we're still too busy about fluffing. We're too busy about church hopping and finding what you talked about last week. We're too busy grabbing Christian consumables. We're not busy about ultimates. And this kind of stuff is forcing us to ultimates and see what the ultimates are and recognize some things. That just one thing that popped into mind is notice the primacy on, like the whole abortion issue is about the freedom to continue to express yourself sexually. Oh yeah. Not about life, which lets you know if it's just about me being able to continue to express myself sexually, you got to ask yourself the question, why? Why can't you express yourself sexually and prevent pregnancy? Because you can. We don't even talk about not having sex. You shouldn't until you get married, because that's God's standard. That's written in the first 3 chapters of Genesis. But you can actually prevent pregnancy and still have sexual relationships. What is it about this that I'm fighting for? And it is simply about individual personal sexual pleasure. That's all it's about. Mm-hmm. It's all it's about. Which then the question is why? Why? And if you trace this back, you can find this in Genesis 6. That's why. because what you are is you're a child of the devil. And until your heart is transformed by this powerful good news of the kingdom, you continue to be an ambassador of the dark kingdom. And you need to be saved, you need to be transformed. Because it is simply, it's not merely about abortion. Abortion is a symptom of the deeper problem of the human heart of being a child of the devil who simply wants their pleasure and to be their own God apart from any constraint laid on them by Jesus Christ.
It teaches choice without consequence.
Absolutely.
And that's the opposite of how the world works.
Yeah. That's not God, natural law, like even without the faith. Like we don't have to inject Jesus Christ on top of that. Natural law teaches us consequences come.
Yeah.
With all decisions. They're good or bad.
Right.
And that's just reality. Fact. Facts are facts are facts.
So true.
Yeah, that's right.
That's true.
We got some Hayes takeaways.
Let's do it. Let's jump into some Hayes takeaways.
Do it.
Today. Number 1, anything meant to bring glory to another God or image or anything that misrepresents or tarnishes the image of the one true God should make us angry because it is sin.
Absolutely.
God made this clear in the 10 Commandments, particularly in the first 2. So just because something is labeled as art or creative does not excuse it.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, men should compete against men and women should compete against women. And people may not like this, but in those instances where it's a deformity or extenuating circumstances, we cannot move the bar. That may leave people out and it may not seem fair, but we can't keep bending the God-given definition of male and female for anything. And then number 3, and finally, Christians, we are living in a time where it is not as popular to be what we are. So we must cling to the word and not depart from it. We must continue to obey what it says. We must continue to be salt and light and to be Jesus to everyone and never waver. There is a right and wrong side, even if the right side is the narrow and unpopular and made fun of way. But we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So I encourage you to stand firm, do not be moved, and do not conform to this world.
Man, that's good stuff. It's fun talking about that. Hope this is helpful for you guys. Hope that you find some nuggets of things in here that will help you process what's happening in our world and help you to think critically about it and apply your faith. We're getting down and wrestling in the dirt with our theology. So, man, we appreciate you guys listening. This is a lot of fun for us. We hope it's enjoyable for you. Hope it's challenging to you. Don't forget, check out the website, theologyinthedirt.com, for sermon notes and YouTube videos of our services and links to the podcast. Share the podcast. Leave a comment. Give us a 5-star rating. All that kind of stuff. We really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Out.
Fortunes of kings and queens.